A word of warning for this week's episode. I sing during this. Don't be alarmed. It doesn't last long and it's quite pleasant. The White Dove from South Africa. Once, long ago, there lived a prince named Sanfu, who was a great hunter. It was the sport he loved above all others, and every day during the season he set out from home very early and hunted until dusk. He was young and he was handsome, but as yet he had no wife, but engaged in adventures at every opportunity. One day in midwinter he collected his weapons, called his dogs, and set out to hunt. He carried assegais, which he could use either as spears or as darts, and knobkerries to knock down the smaller game. The air was clear and bright, the country full of wild creatures, yet look as he might, he could find not one thing. He hated to return home empty-handed, so he hurried on from bush to bush until he came to a strange country which he'd never before visited. He looked across a great valley and saw in the distance two mighty mountains, whose twin peaks stood out against the cloudless sky in glorious tints of red and gold. The right-hand mountain was clothed in bush almost to the summit, with only the topmost crags being bare. There was no sign of man anywhere. Surely this forest at least must abound in game. So Sanfu took up his assegais and kerries and set out to explore the new land. He followed the course of a tiny stream, leaping from rock to rock in the dim green light of the forest. The trees were so thick overhead that the sun never came through, but below one could walk freely on a carpet of long green moss. Every now and then a cave rat darted out at the prince's very feet, but his knobkerrie always missed it. A few minutes later he'd see a magnificent buck, with its head thrown back, standing proud in front of a thicket. But the moment he came within striking distance, his prey was gone. So he toiled on, always disappointed, but always seeing something worth pursuing, until at length the trees grew thinner and further apart. Gradually they dwindled down to mere bushes, and Sanfu found himself on the high grass slopes above the forest. He left the stream and made straight for the pass between the two mountain peaks, determined to see what lay beyond. He gained the high mountain pass and looked down to a beautiful wooded valley with several fine streams, the best possible place for game. Sanfu straightway began bounding down the hill, but at closer view he found the slopes were covered with huge boulders, and the grass was so high it would be impossible to see game. He persevered for some time, then decided to turn back and try his luck again in the forest. But when he looked around to retrace his steps back up the slope, he found it was impossible, because the twin peaks had suddenly become a precipitous wall without break and without an opening, and the grassy slopes had turned to hard granite cliffs without so much as a toehold. Sanfu looked once more at the valley. Then he found he was in a sort of basin, surrounded on every side by steep hills crowned with inaccessible rocks. Puzzled and weary, he went forward, hoping at least to find water and a place to rest for the night. For it was now not far from sundown, the air was growing cold, and it was useless to think of going much further. But the rocks only seemed to grow higher and higher. He could see no open space, nor was there any sound of water. The whole valley was absolutely silent. Suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. He turned his head and was astonished to see a human being. It was an old woman leaning on a black wand, on the top of which perched two black birds. "Tell me, old woman, am I near a kraal?" But the old woman said nothing. He repeated the question. The old woman only touched her ears and her mouth with one hand and shook her head. Then Sanfu knew that she was deaf and she was dumb. So he turned and continued to thread his way in and out of the tall boulders, the old woman following on behind. Presently he heard in the far distance the cooing of a dove. Where there are doves, thought the prince, there are trees, and perhaps water. He pursued his way, guided by the soft, melancholy cry. Soon he could distinguish words, for the dove was singing the lament that all doves have sung from the beginning of things. Kua for Baba, eu of mo mama. Kua for info etu, kua for dadach Ni lala etwe, in chlazy we same John down. My father is dead, my mother is dead, my brethren are dead, my sisters are dead. I sit here alone, my heart is sinking, 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 sinking. Not much farther now, thought the prince, as the singing grew clearer, and a minute later he found himself in a wide open space. Here, a more curious sight met his eyes. No trees were to be seen, but on his left hand there rose up an enormous black cliff. You can imagine how strange it looked, for all the boulders and the crags above them were red, but this rock was jet black. Below on his right flowed a wide black river. It was deep and silent, not so much as a speck of foam appeared on its inky waters. At the base of the cliff were 3 huge caves, and in one of these, right in the middle, sat a pure white dove of exquisite beauty. 2 ravens stood one on either side of her, and the moment they saw the prince they began to dance. They danced faster and faster until at last they lay down exhausted at the feet of the white dove. Then the beautiful bird spoke. "Welcome, prince," she said. "We are so glad to see you. We've been waiting here for years." "Why are you glad to see me?" replied Sanfu, who knew at once that he had met with a great adventure. "What can I possibly do for you?" "You can do us the greatest imaginable service," said the dove. "Look at this cave and repeat the following words 3 times. River, river, wonderful river, mighty river, loose your might and change us into human beings. You it was who bewitched us, now change us again." The prince said the words once, twice, 3 times, and a marvellous thing happened. The cave seemed to open out, and suddenly the whole valley was filled with a burst of the most wonderful song. For within the cave were thousands of beautiful birds of every kind there is in the world. They flashed and shone in the sunlight, golden orioles and many-coloured loris, the emerald cuckoo and all the exquisite finches. Then there were dainty little black honeysuckers, whose lustre is like mother of pearl, and graceful doves of every hue, and beyond all these were gorgeous birds from the great forests of the far north, such as Sanfu had never seen. He gazed in wonder and delight for a long time. Then he turned to the white dove and said, "What do you want me to do now?" "Repeat these words once more," said the white dove. He repeated them again. To his astonishment, the second cave opened out, and thousands of animals appeared. Great herds of buck with beautiful horns, both small and great, noble elephants and tall giraffes, and lions and tigers with glossy skins. Their cries almost drowned the call of the birds, but they appeared to live in peace together, and did one another no harm. "Do you see these animals?" said the dove to the amazed and now silent prince. "Those are my father's men." "Who then are the birds?" "They are the beautiful women and the girls who live in his kingdom." "And the third cave? What does that contain?" "Ah, that is the greatest wonder of all, but you can't open it yet." "Is there nothing else I can do to help you? Because you appear to be under some terrible enchantment." "You can do everything. Do not leave this valley. Stay here for 1 year and 1 year only, and we shall be delivered." "I can't do that. No one will know what's happened to me." "If you refuse," said the dove with a determination you wouldn't have expected from a tiny bird, "you yourself will be changed into an enormous hairy spider and dwell in a house of dried leaves and moss. Everyone will see you and run away, and you will live a life of loneliness and of misery." "You have no consideration for my mother's tears," said Sanfu. "I'm the only son of my father. They'll both think I'm killed." "You shall be fully rewarded," said the dove. "If you do this for us, you'll never regret it. But if you refuse, you will become a horrible spider, and neither your mother nor your father will ever recognize you again." "Well, okay, I promise to stay, and I promise to help you." "Give me your wand," said the dove to the mute woman. "The prince must be hungry." The old woman gave the wand, and as it left her hand, she herself disappeared. The dove took it and threw it to the ground, but curiously enough, the two black birds perched on the top didn't stir, and were thrown down with the staff. As soon as the wand touched the ground, there appeared there an excellent meal, bowls of porridge and thick milk, and strips of meat served on a fine, rich mat, and to crown it all, a big calabash full of good beer. Sanfu was very hungry, and very, very thirsty. He ate and he drank well, and lay down to sleep under a rock. He kept his word, and never attempted to leave the valley. The mute woman did not reappear, and the white dove sat in front of the cave and sang her former melancholy song. She never spoke at all, and might have been nothing more than an ordinary bird. Every day food appeared, and although it was winter, and the nights bitterly cold, Sanfu never so much as shivered, in spite of having neither roof nor blankets in which to wrap himself. "So far I've done well," he thought, "but what will I do when the rains come, and the heavy thunderstorms? I'll be washed away or killed by the hail." Clouds began to appear then every day, and the weather grew oppressively hot. At last one evening a tremendous thunderstorm arose, and Sanfu thought that his last hour had come. To his astonishment, not a drop of rain touched him, and the ground on which he slept remained quite dry. After that he troubled himself no more, but passed his time as best he could in solitude and weariness until the summer was past and the winter once more approached. At last the year was complete, and on the morning of this happy day he went to the dove. "The year is over," he said, "and now at last I can return to my parents. How glad I am to think I can see home once more." "You cannot be more glad than I," said the dove, "for now I too shall be free. Repeat the charm once more." Then the prince repeated the words, "River, river, wonderful river, mighty river, loose your might and change us into human beings. You it was who bewitched us, now change us again." And the cave, which had never opened before, suddenly began to expand. The whole of the rocky basin melted away, and instead appeared open country, well wooded and full of good pasture. Great herds of cattle roamed on the hills, and countless goats and countless sheep. The high inaccessible cliffs were gone, and were replaced by the twin mountain peaks that Sanfu had seen a year ago. "Now repeat the charm again," said the dove. At the magic words the other two caves opened and unfolded, and the beautiful birds flew out all over the meadows, while the animals came and ranged themselves in ranks. The second time the words were repeated, every creature suddenly assumed the head and arms of human beings, and at the third repetition they stood complete men and women. Animals became magnificent warriors in serried ranks, at whose head stood a splendid man in leopard skins, their king. By his side marched two fine princes and an old and wise magician with a long black wand. They were the two ravens and the mute women, as you've no doubt guessed. But the birds had changed to hundreds and thousands of beautiful girls and women, laughing and singing. They came down the hillside running toward the prince, and at their head was the most beautiful woman he had ever beheld. "I am the white dove," she said. "See what you have done for me. Now repeat the charm one last time." And at the wonderful words the black river and the black rock both disappeared. In their place were ripe fields of mealies and kefir corn. Big orange-coloured pumpkins and shining green calabashes lay among the corn, and there were well-grown patches of beans and of ground nuts. All was ready for gathering. The joyous harvest was at hand, and the men and women had only to reap. Everyone greeted the prince with cries of welcome. "We owe you everything," said the king. "I will give you 100 fine cattle, and goats and sheep without end." But Sanfu was silent, and did not reply. "You do not seem pleased. Is there anything else we can give you? You have only to ask." "All I want," said Sanfu, "is the princess. I want no cattle, for I am a rich man, and my father a great chief. But I will give hundreds of oxen for the princess, if only I may have her for my wife." The princess looked at him with delight, but the king hesitated, and said he must confer with his chief men. He consulted them day after day for many weeks, not, I think, because he didn't care for Sanfu, but simply to show that he was a great king, and his daughter was not to be had just when asked for. At last, when poor Sanfu was worn out with anxiety, for he loved the princess dearly, the king said he was ready to receive him. "The princess is yours, on one condition, that you stay here and that you live in our country. Go home first and bring what when you will as your followers, but do not leave us altogether." The prince willingly promised for the sake of the white dove. He went home, told all his adventures to his father and his mother, and at the end all of his people rose up and came with him. The wedding of Sanfu the hunter and the white dove was celebrated with great festivities, and, as you may well believe, was soon followed by many more between his men and the beautiful girls who once were many-coloured birds.